y'all. Welcome to Royally Unfiltered, a show that takes you behind palace gates like never before. This is where tradition meets truth and nothing is off limits. This week, helping me tackle all the biggest headlines is royal commentator and PR guru, Richard Fitzwilliams. You're the perfect person to talk to today about everything that's going on, because there are several, potential, at least I think with Sentebale, I think that looks like a crisis. So I'd love your thoughts on what's currently going on. Prince Harry stepping down. He's one of the co-founders of this charity that apparently means everything to him. It was created based on the legacy of his mother, his team, the trustees, and I imagine the co-founders as well, being labeled misogynistic, being labeled in some ways, she believes that they are attacking her because she is a Black woman, she claims. What does this look like for Prince Harry when he's talking to the people he trusts, his council? Are they saying, we need to get ahead of this? Are they saying sit this one out and keep your head down? How does he navigate this really nasty turn of events with a charity that meant so much to him?
Oh, this was a shock. I mean, I was amazed when I heard the reports. But what we've undoubtedly got to be watching is how it plays out from here, and if it actually, for example, ends up in a court. It appears, according to the Telegraph, that the reason for the, well, quite literally, implosion, in the sense that not only Prince Harry, of course, as you correctly say, I mean, this is something that dates back some 20 years. It was founded in memory of his mother. Sentebale means forget me not in Sutu, and that was her favorite flower. I think it's really a pretty desperate business, because not only Prince Harry is involved, but of course Prince Seso and his mother. She also, in her memory, you have something that's very, very precious to both of them. Queen Mahato, he was devoted to, I understand. And on top of that, you've got 5 trustees quitting. But if we look further back, and I think this happened without a great deal of publicity,
Mhm.
several trustees left, or several persons involved in the administration left, and that included Baroness Chalker, who was very into African affairs, famously so, when in the Conservative governments years ago. And I think this is a crisis that's been coming. Obviously, we know that Dr. Sophie Chandauka, she's thrown the book at the trustees and the 2 princes. I mean, accusing them of discrimination, of bullying, of harassment, and so forth. The Prince Harry hasn't been specifically named, but it is abundantly clear when she talks about victimhood, and when I mean, it's a long,
And it says you're using the press that you hate to basically villainize her. That's where I was like, okay, well, that's pretty blatant.
Yes, I know, and also in all these phrases, misogynar and so forth, poor governance and so forth, it has echoes. I realise this isn't specifically linked to Sentebale, but these accusations, which are going to be very difficult to answer, it had odd echoes of Oprah, and the way, for example, that Harry and Meghan owned certain truths, that the royal family were callous, that they were racist, or there was a racist aspect to them. And the fact of any subtleties in that was completely lost, because, as you know, I mean, it became infamous. So the problem with all this, where does Harry go from here? He and Prince Seoso have, with the greatest reluctance, left. You've had a mass resignation of the trustees, but in the statements that have been put out by the charity, it all but sidelines the trustees as though they didn't matter. So this, in theory, could have gone to the High Court, and still could in Britain. But on the other hand, if the charity has so little money, I think one of the things that the princes were concerned about, and the trustees were concerned about, that if they stretched this further because they wanted to get rid of Dr. Chandorka, and she refused to leave, and the Charity Commission apparently are looking into the rights and wrongs of it. So it is very difficult, because obviously if you feel for a charity, and I have to say I do have certain feelings for Harry in this situation, because we know that he has a fondness, a deep love of Africa. We know that this goes back to a period where he was attempting to recover from the trauma of his mother's death. Indeed, in spades, as you know, I mean, it's very difficult to appreciate. He can't understand really that she's gone. He attempts to cling on. This is the very last thing that he would wish, but where they go from here is anyone's guess, because we just don't know how this might play out, and if it could perhaps play out judicially.
Yeah, because you mentioned Harry, and I believe in his statement, both princes acknowledge not wanting to spend a significant amount of money to fight this. And there were reports, I don't know if you saw this in the Daily Mail today, I believe it was a Richard Kay piece, about how Sentebale were accused of mismanaging their donations early on in their existence. Some of the people in management were receiving such a significant amount of money. They were put up in a home where they had a staff. Their children's school were paid for. I think it was overseas. And only a certain amount of money were actually going to not a significant amount of money, a not significant enough amount of money were going to the orphaned children that lost their parents to HIV and AIDS. And once Sentebale was challenged on that, they did make some internal changes. I believe that person left that had such a significant had such a significant salary in the home, and the kids were going, I think that person actually was phased out. So there, like you said, they've had hiccups in the past, but to see Prince Harry actually step down and to be accused of some of the things that he's actually accused the British royal family of, or the what do they call them, the men in the gray suits, that's got to be a struggle. From a PR perspective, do you think that Prince Harry should address some of these accusations publicly, though, because we only heard from Prince Harry briefly in the process of his resignation, and then Dr. Sophie spoke out, definitely pushing the line when it came to trying to defend herself in the court of public opinion. I mean, she's like, you guys decide. Do you think that Prince Harry should react at all? He's out here trying to position himself as an anti-racism activist, and now he is siding and displaying loyalty to people that Dr. Sophie is saying is acting potentially surely discriminatory.
Yes, it's an interesting one for Harry and his team, and also Harry and Meghan, because they've spent so much capital positioning themselves, especially I mean, Meghan particularly campaigning for women of colour, absolutely. And also, there's no question, Harry's spoken out about racism and also the awareness of it. The problem is, of course, that he has linked the royal family to it, and not just on the Oprah interview, but subsequently, and that has done a tremendous amount of harm, and he must be aware of the irony involved in some of this. I think it also is the case that there does seem to be, as you say, I read the Richard Kay piece, it does seem that money wasn't used as well as it might be. It also seems to be, or from what we understand, part of a battle as to where money should be spent, should the charity be mainly based in Southern Africa, which it would probably make sense in theory.
Thank you for saying that, because I was saying I totally understand if Prince Harry's in the UK. Both of these princes are represented where they're planted. I get that. But it sounds like Dr. Sophie is saying, you're no longer over there. Why are we going to spend X amount of dollars going back and forth to raise money. It feels like the opposite, it doesn't feel like common sense for us to be hopping on planes, going back and forth to raise money. Let's keep it home and let's try to do everything right here. And that's Richard Kay makes this argument. And I think I saw Rebecca English make a similar argument that, and I have hesitated to do it, but based on seeing two people that I admire do it, I'm going to just go ahead and throw it out there. How committed was Prince Harry to this charity lately, when he has not spent a significant amount of time out there? Meghan Markle never visited, this person that is the most important person in his world, one of the most important charities in his world. He never brought Meghan Markle out to visit. Instead, they went to Botswana. You know, both Richard Kay and Rebecca English are saying, Prince Harry, maybe you dropped the ball here. And I don't like to kick a man when he's down, but I think Richard Kay had a point there.
Yeah, I think so. And also, well, I mean, you mention of balls reminds me of polo. The fact that there were polo matches and so forth. You could say that, well, any money raised for a good cause is very good, but was it being handled in the right way? Was there enough? Could there have been more? I understand that Harry gave 1.5 million or thereabouts from the proceeds of Spare for the charity. So in one way or another, very clearly, there are problems with that. Then obviously we're looking at, the charity did expand. It firstly from Lesotho to include Botswana, and as you say, how he's taken Meghan, I think it's twice, but not to Lesotho. Also, I think there's some work that goes on in Malawi, and I think also, I don't know what year this began, but they very gradually broadened out from those who'd been orphaned from HIV/AIDS. And obviously this was, the link with his mother was so very, very precious to him. So clearly, it's become a charity linked to Southern Africa, but quite a bit of it. And therefore, we are looking, I would have thought, at a more sensible attitude and base for the charity to at least have a very large percentage of it and the managerial side, because otherwise you are looking at any rate, the way I read it, people in far off capitals or possibly those who are not so knowledgeable on the ground. I mean, it varies according to the individual, but the basic point that the charitable or the charities organization should be far more centered in, or should be centered in Southern Africa, I would have thought made total sense.
I agree with you. And I'm sorry I didn't prep you or warn you that I was going to ask you about this question, but are you familiar at all with the African Parks scandal? And
Yes.
yeah, and how much, I mean, and I don't know if you've heard what I've heard about Invictus, that there are issues, and we've seen people step down recently from Invictus. I mean, I just feel like what's going on with Sentebale is a reflection of kind of the chaos that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle attract. But Prince Harry, if the Invictus drama stays quiet, then Invictus is really his go-to, and he's always wanted that to be his legacy, as far as I understand. But with the African Parks scandal, I feel like it's becoming unmanageable. Sentebale is a huge embarrassment, I think, and could potentially be worse if they were to ever go to court and there were receipts when it comes to some of these accusations. I mean, I don't even know if that's a question as much as I'm in mourning. I'm just sad.
I think, firstly, regarding Africa Parks, this is something that's terribly serious. The exploitation, yes, allegedly, of the Barker people by those in its employ. And I think the way that that's been handled is just simply silent. I mean, the accusations are made. Harry is president. I think he'd been linked with it. I think it's some 8 or 9 years.
Yeah.
And nothing has at least transpired. So,
and do you remember when he was in New York for I believe it was I don't remember what the big thing was. He was in New York. He had several charity meetings, but the African Parks event was closed to media because of all this stuff.
In
Like,
which case, it's surely reasonable for us to expect either him to step aside, since there were shocking allegations, or on the other hand, that there should be an investigation which would come to a conclusion, or that we might be given an idea when the investigation that's supposedly going into it, into these allegations, might come to. Well, to we know what's happening, or that he, as president, because I mean it's something that definitely should happen. You've also got, I think you've got a fondness for Africa. I mean, to some extent, almost childishly in Spare, he talks about William wanting Africa and as his own, and some, as though there was some weird colonial fantasy. I mean, it's ridiculous. It takes one back to a certain fancy dress party, which was themed of was it natives and colonials, wasn't it, that I'm thinking of? It's really
yes.
terrifying to mention it again. But I do think that Harry's certainly sees the military was obviously the making of him. He's always said that, and fair enough. Invictus is absolutely remarkable. Also, the fact that those of us who remember the old Harry, and we both do very well, remember that it was Invictus and it was Sentebale and it was Wellchild, and they were all before he and Meghan met. And Graydon Carter reminded us rather amusingly this week, of course, about the Vanity Fair cover, which celebrated that and Meghan's response to it.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah. And I got an email today, and you might have gotten the same email because it's a contact we both work with, asking if I could confirm that Meghan wore the same perfume that Princess Diana did when she first met Prince Harry. My answer was like, I actually cannot confirm this. I don't, I've heard this story. I probably repeated this story in a gossipy way, but I can't actually confirm it, because I don't know where the source is. It's just one of those stories that are whispered around. But I do feel strongly that Meghan positioned herself through charity in a way to get in front of people like Prince Harry, because she wanted to marry somebody like Prince Harry. I mean, there are pictures of her where she's even posed like Princess Diana in the white button up top and the pants, the high-waisted pants, not even remotely the way she dresses today. I would never imagine these outfits that I saw her in when she's doing some of these charity trips before she meets Harry. She, not in a wardrobe I would ever imagine her in today. So I do think that a lot of the charity work, why I laugh at the Vanity Fair thing, is clearly you're on the cover of Vanity Fair because someone whispered into the booker's ear that you were going to marry Prince Harry. That wasn't public knowledge yet. I'm not even, somebody gave that booker a scoop. But I never even felt like the charity work was authentic to begin with. I felt like the charity work was to build a brand. She wanted to look like Angelina Jolie. She wanted to look like Princess Diana.
I think definitely the brand. I mean, mind you, one has to say that Tig was relatively successful. She was a B-list actress. She was pretty good in Suits, for all I understand. I've never seen the other than a few clips of it, but it's not my thing as such, and it's.
And you are an entertainment reviewer, so that speaks volumes.
Well, I think Suits, it had it, one has to admit, it did have a very devoted fan club, and well, she's still got that, of course, to some extent. But I'm surprised you don't bear witness to Meghan's, the fact that she knew so little about the royal family. She didn't know much background to Prince Harry. I mean, the one photograph that sticks in my mind when she was 15 outside Buckingham Palace. I mean, that's one thing, the only bit of evidence, but that she was so gauche that someone as hard as nails and someone, why shouldn't she be ambitious? But good Lord, if you're ambitious and you're setting your cap at Prince Harry, and pretend that you've not Googled him, or words to that effect. I mean, it's utterly bizarre. I mean, the idea that she would think wild about Harry, the Vanity Fair cover. It's interesting, actually. I reread that article in 2017. It's so fascinating to to read the way she gives such generous credit to a character called Thomas Markle, who helped to bring her up in some way. Have you heard of such a person?
Not lately. I can tell you that much. That person is, I wish I just did a video on Harry's relationship with the word racism, and I forgot to mention that. I wish I would have mentioned them accusing Vanity Fair of racism for the Wild About Harry cover, which was so sweet. And what somebody else pointed out to me was that that was actually a headline from when Princess Diana gave birth to him. Oh,
I don't think it wasn't the racism that Carter was talking about, as I remembered. It was what outraged her was that her philanthropy, that
mm-hmm.
it wasn't her charities.
Yep.
Surely that is what they were interested in. I mean, whether or not she wanted a particular cover, good Lord, that I mean, it's very interesting also remembering Vanity Fair's most recent expose and the allegations of bullying coming back, which they did.
Again, oh, that's a word that tends to follow these two. Yeah, and remember, according to Tom Bauer, she stopped she called the journalist that did the story. So what Graydon Carter's talking about is how she wanted them to focus on her philanthropy, and it was Valentine Lowe, I believe, or Tom Bauer, but I think Valentine Lowe perhaps first, that exposed that Harry and Meghan were angry and accused them of racism for the Wild About Harry because Judy Garland is in blackface when she sings that in the movie. And they tried to have the headline changed on the website, and they refused to change the headline on the website. But then Tom Bauer goes on to report that Meghan actually picked up the phone and called the journalist from Vanity Fair and said, you know what, I thought we could be friends, but because he left out the P&G or the soap story about how she wrote the soap company saying when she was 11, because they tried to fact check that, could not confirm it, and left it out of the story. She was so irate that she called the journalist up after she saw the press preview and said, I thought we could be friends, but we can't be friends anymore.
Well, if she wants to throw her contacts to the wolves like that, I mean, it does show. It says
well, let's just look what she did to Piers Morgan, and I bet you that's a burn that she should have never done, because he was one of her biggest critics, and absolutely well. I mean, let's just phase into Meghan Markle talk now, because we've had a busy Meghan Markle week. And Piers Morgan is there's probably steam coming out of his ears because he's so over having to look at all the Meghan Markle headlines. Now, I want to ask you right off the bat about it just feels like hit after hit after hit after hit when it comes to announcements from Meghan Markle, brand announcements from Meghan Markle. She's launching this over here. She's launching that over there. My head is spinning, but I also do this for a living. As somebody that is just a casual watcher, do you think that Meghan's announcements have become overwhelming? Because starting in January, it was, hey, 2 weeks from now, my new Netflix show's out. Hey, actually, it's a month and a half now, but I am touring disaster sites. Hey, my new podcast is coming out. Buy these clothes. Also after, as ever, used to be American Riviera Orchard, but now it's as ever. Right? I mean, how caffeinated is this person?
exactly so, and I mean we've even got. I think you got the American Riviera Orchard becoming as ever. We've got the With Love Meghan, and then there's the second one which we didn't know was being filmed back to back. Then there's the Lemonada Media, the Archetypes coming back, and then there's Meghan returning to Instagram. And
Archetypes isn't coming back. It's now Confessions of a Female Founder. So there's another name we have to remember.
Yes, 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 we must indeed. And it's just as well that, I mean, people of my generation in Britain, I mean, when they talk about the Confessions of, which is a name that she's chosen, and I mean, she's not noted for choosing the right names in every respect. I'm just thinking as a film critic, not that I saw them, but there were a series of sex comedies in the 1980s called Confessions of, so perhaps Meghan happened to hear of those. No, but it's an overkill. I mean,
Yeah.
Oscar Wilde, I think, said moderation is a fatal thing. Nothing succeeds like excess. I mean, this is really throwing it at people. I would have thought that one thing I would concede, she is a fashion influencer because she's royal, as we're told, and Meghan Sussex, of course. And oh yes, we forgot her online clothing.
Yep. Yeah.
Good.
She's an influencer now. I
Shop
mean,
My, no, Shop My's also several garments having royal names just so happened. The whole thing is quite extraordinary, but where it will go, I suspect. I do think that she's going to last more than I did because with Sarandos, the chief executive officer of Netflix, saying nice things about her, with the contract coming up later in the year, the $100 million, as we know, is absolutely pivotal. That does indicate that it will be renewed or in some form, not, I suspect, in the original form. There's far too much I'd imagined. But
especially
that
based on the return on investment, which was literally one commercial success. Everything else seems to have bombed. And with Love Megan, I feel like content wise was pretty humiliating. But also, Richard, you're a PR expert. Ted Sarandos couldn't sit down with Variety because this was a big piece. It wasn't just about Megan, but Ted Sarandos couldn't sit down with Variety and say, wow, what a cluster. Like he couldn't do that.
well, mind you, I thought it extraordinary that the Spotify, when that contract closed down, that an executive would call them expletive deleted grifters.
Yeah.
That was something that perhaps Spotify were a little regretful of because they seem to be behind, at least in theory. I think they've sent good wishes for her new, as you say, confessions / archetypes, who, I mean, she failed before with something similar. Lemonade Media aren't Spotify, obviously, but they are relatively new and growing, and obviously they see this as an opportunity. I mean, we can see what they see in it.
Right.
Other thing, of course, that they haven't been able to do is write, because if they don't write material that's unfavorable about the royal family, I mean, who on earth is going to read it? And the Random House, the idea that there were 3 or 4 books in it, this is what we thought originally, and that's
Well,
when
I think that she could take the With Love Megan content and turn that into some sort of lifestyle Martha Stewart book. I mean, again, I wouldn't buy it, but you've got Ted Sarandos saying we're going to put all of our money and all of our effort behind this person, or we're going to encourage this person. Why is beyond me, but it's like there are still people. I completely agree with you, though, and I've actually said previously, clothes. But unfortunately for her, as ever, could not get the clothing trademark because somebody else has the clothing trademark. So she had to create the Shop My to get around the clothing trademark. And I don't know if she'll make her own stuff, but she'd probably have to partner with another brand to do that because as ever limits her to cooking goodies and tangible items that are not something that you can wear, because then that violates a trademark that apparently exists for someone else. Do you have an issue with the fact that we're seeing more and more photos and videos of the children to promote her products?
I think that people will, if it's as overt as it seems to me to be, because we, as you mentioned, are following it for a living. I mean, obviously, when there's so many things that it's almost impossible for us to remember. Heaven knows how confused the average person, so to speak, is. But they would be interested to see photographs of the children. As you know, this is a pleasure that is denied to almost everybody. The most recent photograph, of course, used for promotion, didn't show their faces. And you could sort of see that the next stage in it, when it suits her, will show their faces. And then that will get worldwide coverage. That's the way basically it works. But on the other hand, she realizes with insisting on being called Meghan Sussex and ticking Mindy Kaling off for getting it wrong with Meghan Markle in the With Love Meghan. I mean, that made her a bit of a laughing stock. But what's behind it is unquestionably the fact that she is aware that there is fascination worldwide in everything they do, or most things, and the fact that it's so confusing at the moment. Give it 6 months, see how these different projects and products and so forth are doing. It will be very interesting. And then perhaps, to what extent will confessions work, or to what extent will she actually sell products? Will Netflix, or how interested will they be in them? And what will their next project be? Because there won't be a third cooking
Well, I
series.
think it's Meet Me at the Lake, which we're patiently waiting for, the scripted book.
Yeah, we've been waiting. When did they take the option on that?
2 years ago. But you're right. Like it feels like Meghan always announces things, and then it's the forever wait. American Riviera Orchard, Limonada. She announced in February of last year. It will take over a year for her to actually execute that. American Riviera Orchard, she teased to try to crush Richard Eden in his scoop, and it actually never came to fruition. So she teases things before anything's available, and it's just like you have that one friend or relative, and no shade to multi-level marketing, but you know how you have that one friend or relative on Facebook that's like, I'm selling Amway now. By the way, now I'm selling this, now I'm doing this protein shake, company. Now I'm doing this energy, like, and it's just, and you're just, you can't keep up with their resume because you're like, good Lord, it's just every day it's something new. And by the way, again, no shade, my family did Amway, but I just feels like so scattered and I'm overwhelmed. And I don't think that she looks organized or she looks in sync with all the projects. All of the projects don't even seem like they make sense to each other. And it makes me, I don't know, it makes me not trust the brands because it seems like she lacks commitment and lacks the ability to follow through. And I think the biggest example of that is 18 months as a working royal.
Which was so little. And if you're actually looking at what she's interested always in, she's pretty ruthless, we know that. And she's interested in projection of personality and allowing for the fact that she suffered enormous stress, which has been controversial. But I mean, her mental health affected, and we know the story. We heard it on Oprah. We read it in Spare. But just consider, just for a minute, if she had lasted as a working royal, if she had, in fact, they both taken up the Commonwealth jobs as patronages, and at the moment, with the monarchy actually having an important role to play in serious geopolitics, it really would have made a tremendous difference. She'd have had a cachet that beyond anything she could possibly have dreamt of. But no, as you say, it was just a relatively few months. And of course, there was that television interview in South Africa with ITV, and well, people don't care. They don't look and ask whether I'm fine and all the rest of it. And I mean, we saw subsequently this vast amount of publicity because, of course, again, with the Windsors in the 1930s, this with the precedent, with the fact that, she was American, she was a person of color, she was a divorcee, she was an actress. So, I mean, clearly it's tailor-made for today's world, but she could actually have had a very, very substantial part to play, as Harry could, in today's world, seriously, in the Commonwealth, but also, with the United States at the moment, given the political difficulties, because as an American, just think, it would have been absolutely unique. She and Harry could have had a behind the scenes influence entirely regardless of what her personal opinions might be of the American president. And it would have been
How entitled and arrogant she was the one time he visited while after she married Prince Harry, they refused to see him. I don't think she has that power anymore. I think the arrogance is still there to, obvious. I'm Meghan Sussex now, but I don't think she still has that power that I imagine she loved by denying a meeting with Donald Trump, who was President Trump, I should say, when he went to the UK. I've mentioned this a couple times. So for the people that watch me or listen to me regularly, I apologize, but this is just something that is really eating at me. A part of me feels like this barrage of announcements is to distract from her failures and to silence people like you and I that comment on her failures. I am being absolutely torn apart by the critics about my new TV show. Let us get excited, or whatever her stupid hat said. I got season 2 of my show. It just feels like she's verbally vomiting all of these details on us, or dropping these vague photos of her kids, because she knows that that's one time that the Daily Mail will post about her from her point of view and what she wants you to know, versus someone like you or I chiming in about what's going on with her professionally and maybe pointing out something negative, or something she said previously that doesn't align with what she's doing today. It just feels like their strategy is like throw a million things at the press, because if they can distract them with all these stupid things like Gwyneth Paltrow and Meghan Markle sitting at the same table, then other people will stop talking about their critics. They can silence their critics in this way.
I wonder whether the point is, of course, the old joke about the only thing worse than being talked about is not being talked about. The very fact that everything to do with the monarchy, if news isn't there, some people will try and make it up with online as it is. So it's so difficult because the Mail does tend to be pretty hostile, but they know that there's a war on. I mean, one thinks back, the press have done Harry some favors. His first tour of duty in Afghanistan had that absolutely unprecedented, it didn't get a mention in Spare, agreement that journalists wouldn't publicize it. Some did eventually, unfortunately, but
that was Australia, yeah.
And as a result, one would have thought there might be a little nod to that in Spare, which there wasn't. But of course, the press were hagiographic, as you know, when they married. Then subsequently, of course, again, for various reasons, the fallout has been so intense. But the argument, and it is interesting, that their fans are such that they'll go through hell and high water and do anything. So if there's coverage in the press, and very often it'll be negative, at least they would look at it perhaps in the sense that they are in the news. So those who support us will buy whatever it is, or will see whatever it is. So it's quite possible. I mean, it could, but I think it's a mixture of both, because I do think they are disorganized. I don't think that, I mean, the mess about America, Riviera Orchard, and the trademark difficulties and the legal problems and so on. So, I do think they've got they've got a certain cast of mind, fans, that will swallow anything, which we know the Sussex squad are notorious. But they have apparently dumped Omid Scobie. Now that, you can't say that they don't learn something, because that was a catastrophe. And if you remember Finding Freedom, and that they denied to anyone reading that rubbish that they'd cooperated, and she admitted it in court again when they case against the Mail on Sunday. So I mean, so much of what's said, and
that one paragraph in Finding Freedom where we actually know what yoga pose she's in and what thoughts are going through her mind, and you're like, what? You had nothing to do with this? How do we know what yoga pose you're in, let alone what you're thinking in that moment?
I mean, at the end of, as I understood it at the index, there was an acknowledgement that the Sussexes had been consulted, but it didn't, of course, say how much. But they actually pretended, no, that's the sort of person they use, and that's sort of mistake, a dreadful mistake as it happened, given his subsequent activities. And they have cut loose from that. But of course, People magazine is very strongly in their camp. And I mean, they do choose from time to time, but one remembers
Harper's Bazaar, People magazine, and Us Weekly, we've seen them work directly with lately. Harper's Bazaar and People went on one of their faux royal tour. They each went on a faux royal tour with them. So yes, I mean, People magazine, they have a direct line to them. It's every single day. And I guess there's something in it for People, but I won't even click on their links anymore, because I'm like, this is like propaganda that I refuse to participate in.
Well, I mean, what has to say, a US weekly will use comments from me, so I do
Well,
have
you're
to.
a handsome guy. I get that. I understand why. Before I let you go, I want to ask, what do you see, um, predict Meghan, the success of Meghan's podcast? I feel like there's not the same pressure that she had at Spotify to succeed. I think that the expectations are much lower at Lemonada Media because they are a startup. That Axios said was on sale not too long ago, that they were like quietly trying to sell the company. So who knows what that shakeup could lead to. But I feel like there's just a lot less pressure at Lemonada and a lot less resources. So she's not in a position to call and say a million times, I need edits, I want this changed, because quite frankly, like they're going to say, we can't do that. Um, so I think that it will just live. It will just exist. I don't think it's going to be taking on Joe Rogan. I just think it will comfortably exist.
I'm wondering whether I was just listening to what you were saying about their faux royal tours. You've given them an idea, I think, for their next activities after we've had the first Confessions podcast. I think another faux royal tour will be what they'll get up to.
God help
That would
us.
that would be quite a collection of things, wouldn't it, in about 3 or 4 months?
Yeah. Well, at least it would give Prince Harry something to do. We're all asking ourselves, what does he do all day long other than, smoke a J and surf? I'm not sure that walk the dog. I'm not sure I know exactly what his day to day looks like, or if it's challenging in any way, shape, or form. And that's why I do understand why Meghan's working so hard for a buck. But knowing that she's desperate to keep the title, I feel like it looks like greed that I typically don't associate with the British royal family. I certainly wouldn't associate that word with Queen Elizabeth. And I actually, it just angers me to see this woman who, do you remember, she told Oprah that titles didn't matter to her. She wasn't about the grandeur of titles. She also told Oprah that the royal family tried to take her name from her, Meghan Markle. And now she's insisting we call her Meghan Sussex. I believe, I think you hinted at this earlier, because she realizes that the Sussex is in relation to royalty, and she's got to keep that proximity to the British royal family. And I just loathe the idea of her monetizing the monarchy. That was not the agreement, because Harry and Meghan could have been publicly humiliated like Wallace and Edward were, and they were not. The Queen was so kind and said, hey, you know what? Just if you want to step back, do it on a temporary basis. And they had time to think about their consequences, and they were stubborn as all hell. And then they lost the chance to come. As far as I understand, the reason why they were so angry and vengeful in the Oprah Winfrey interview is because they just found out that the palace decided that temporary stepping back was going to be permanent, whether they wanted it or not. There was no half in, half out. They weren't going to negotiate. The palace decided where you're at right now is where you can stay.
Of course, one has to bear in mind that they were still quite generous after all. Gail King from CBS did say that, well, if Prince Philip was in hospital, they didn't know this when the program was planned, but as it happened, it went ahead. But they would have pulled it if he died. Can you just imagine any circumstances where, for example, he's King Charles's father? How on earth would that ever be forgotten? Of course, you couldn't trust someone who behaved like that. Of course, just proved to be the tip of the iceberg. And I mean, it was a brutal, a ruthless nuclear bomb planted in the middle of Buckingham Palace. It's still reverberating because people associate, young people particularly, the royal family. You mentioned racism, you mentioned callousness, the mental health areas, and also the fact that the implication was complete rubbish that Archie was not given a title because of his race. Absolute tripe. They didn't marry twice either. This sort of thing. But one of the things that they can always rely on, it seems, is that they never have to answer for
Yeah.
all these. points. And as for giving up the title, well, that was put to Harry, as I remember. I think it was an interview for promoting Spare.
Anderson Cooper, yeah.
And he replied, "What would that prove?" Well, it would prove a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, it would prove that you're rejecting this. Well, I just read an article about how he only is an activist. This is actually, you'll appreciate this, in The Cut, Meghan's chosen outlet. I read an article about how Prince Harry is only a racism activist because of how it's personally affected him. But before anything ever happened between, between Meghan and the British press, he was like blissfully oblivious and didn't care. And even to this day, he only cares when it affects himself and his wife and his children. So that was an interesting read coming from The Cut, which we know Meghan hand chose to work with when she did that interview that I know she regrets, where she talked about palm trees holding hands and how Harry and her are salt and pepper shakers. It never gets weirder. All right, Richard, did you have anything else to add? I know this was a busy week and we talked about a lot, but I'm sure we missed something.
Just a memory, was it in The Cut that Meghan made the absolutely surreal comment that when they married, there was dancing in the streets in South Africa, much like the day when Nelson Mandela was let out of prison, supposedly to a person who didn't exist, of course, and then linked to the Lion King. Wasn't that The Cut?
That happened. That is actual factual truth. That is that, and that's honestly why I think we're seeing such boring content coming from Meghan today. I thought We Love Meghan was incredibly boring. The most personality I've seen from Meghan Markle in the last 5 years was in that Gwyneth Paltrow video, and my body rejected it. I have to be honest. But I think that the reason she is so overly boring in With Love Meghan and in I imagine this upcoming podcast is because she sees the backlash when it comes to things like the Cut interview and Variety and some of the weird things that she has said in the past. Oh
Yes.
gosh, the dramatic curtsy in this Netflix series.
Yes, the imitation of her first curtsy to the Queen, even Harry didn't think much of that.
No, absolutely not. No, I'm glad you brought that up because I think that we should never forget the day that Meghan compared herself to Nelson Mandela. God bless. God love. All right. Agree with us, disagree with us. Let us know in the comments below. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video with a friend. Richard Fitzwilliams. I looked on my schedule. I think you're coming back soon. So you're a date I get to have, and I love that. Thanks so much for your time today. Everyone should follow you on Twitter and Instagram, where you give us beautiful tours of London and art museums and all the cool events you go to and all your cool friends. I look forward to talking to you again soon, and I love you, friend. Thanks for talking to me today.
So enjoyed it, Kinsey. Back
Bye.
anytime.
Bye.